I used to use Craigslist for everything when I was looking for good deals, as it was never short of a good find. You could literally save yourself a lot of money with the deals you could find on there. But one such time I used it turned out to be a true nightmare. I was searching for a car for my son as he was turning 18 soon. Craigslist was the best place to find a good deal, and let's face it, cars aren't cheap, and for a first car, I wanted to get him something reliable, but not pay over the odds for a first car. So naturally, I thought to search Craigslist and see what secondhand deals I could find. After browsing through pages of cars, I saw a 2011 Honda Civic for $3,600. It had reasonable mileage, looked great in the pictures, and was in particularly good condition from what I could see, so I thought it would be a steal. The owner mentioned his phone number on the listing, so I gave him a call. He didn't answer, so I sent a text inquiring about the car and to show my interest. After a few hours, I got a reply from the owner who was more than happy to let me come and view it. We decided to meet at 2 p.m. the following day for me to view the car with the hope of buying it. The owner told me his name was Jason, and he looked forward to meeting me. I wanted to get the car before somebody else did, as it was a great deal. I was wondering why nobody else had picked it up yet, as it was just too good of a deal. But then I noticed the listing was fairly recent, so that put my mind at ease. The next day, after confirming the address, I made my way to view the car. As I pulled up, I noticed that I wasn't in the best area. It was kind of run down and had a bad vibe to it. I sat in my car for a minute looking for the house. When I located it, I didn't see the Civic anywhere on the drive, so I thought maybe it was in the garage. I got out and made my way to the door. There was no doorbell, so I had to knock on it. There was no answer. I tried to call the guy, but he didn't pick up, so I knocked again, a bit harder. But still, no answer. After waiting a few minutes, I was about to head back to my car. I stepped down the front steps when the door opened behind me.
"Hey,"
a deep voice said. A strange man came out. He was very tall and muscly. His face was stern and hardened, with a few tattoos around his cheeks and eyes. His hair was tightly waxed backwards. "Oh, hey, are you Jason?" I asked him. He replied with a soundless laughter and said,
"Of course. You here for the Honda? Come on in."
As we entered, he offered me a drink from the table that was already prepared. I declined and thanked him for the offer, though. He didn't reply as he shuffled around the room. I found it strange and awkward as none of us spoke for what felt like a good few minutes. We just stood there and didn't seem to be going to see the car. It was getting awkward, so I asked him some questions related to the car. He didn't reply. Everything I said was ignored by him, and it made me quite confused and honestly annoyed. I was already feeling uncomfortable and found him strange, so I asked him if he was going to talk or not. He started laughing like a maniac. I got up and started walking toward the door. He stopped me by calling out my name. I didn't remember telling him my name, though. I stopped and turned back.
"Let's go to the garage where the car is,"
he said, as I was there, and I wanted to view the car with the intention of collecting it later that day. My ambition for a good deal took over, and without thinking, I followed him to the garage. As we walked to the garage, I noticed another man out of the corner of my eye, again quite menacing, and a hardened look across his face staring at me from the next room. I started to feel uneasy. We reached the garage, and, as you may have already guessed, the car seemed completely different from the pictures I'd seen in the ad. It was in terrible condition. The photos I'd seen were just clickbait. I should have known and trusted my gut instinct when I first stepped inside the house. Jason stared at me as he looked at my reaction. I felt I was in such a vulnerable position. Clearly, I wasn't going to buy this car, so I mustered up the courage and I told him I wasn't really interested at the price, trying to break it politely to him. But as I did, Jason kept insisting that I take it, saying, "No, you wanted it. It's yours now." Then, to make matters worse, the guy from the other room appeared behind me in the doorway to the garage. As he entered, he stared at me hard. I could see the anger in him. He started asking me if I was messing around and taking them for fools. I now became uneasy and concerned, fearing that I was at the risk of being hurt. So I tried to think of a quick answer. And to that, I told them I had my car here as it was, so I couldn't drive both cars back, and I was shopping around at a few cars before I decided. This didn't work. They again forced it by saying it was no problem, they would follow me back and drive it for me. At this moment, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I backed up to the door and insisted I would get back to them after I'd viewed a few other cars, hoping they didn't see through my bluff. I then picked up a fast pace, leaving the garage heading for the front door, both men in tow behind me. They wouldn't take no for an answer, saying I wouldn't get a better deal.
"Don't make a decision you're gonna regret,"
Jason said to me in an undeniably threatening tone. I opened the front door and headed to my car. I looked back. The other man disappeared as Jason stood in the doorway staring at me in anger. I jumped in my car, adrenaline pumping, my whole body sweating, thankful to be out of there as I drove off. But as I drove off, I was sure I saw the Honda pull out of the garage and turn in my direction. I wasn't taking any chances and sped up to get the hell out of there. That night, I was so relieved to be home, but I was angry about what had happened. I was angry with them, but not as angry as I was with myself for putting myself in that position, as it could have been a lot worse. I was just beginning to settle down when I heard what seemed to be doors slamming outside of my house. I looked outside my window and my heart began to race. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A car had pulled up outside my house and parked next to my car. 4 men got out. One of them was the man I had seen at Jason's house. Fear spread through my body as I heard loud bangs on my front door. I was home alone. My wife and son were out. I began to panic as I grabbed my phone to dial 911. As I did, I could hear the door being hit harder and harder, and before I knew it, crashing to the floor. I knew they were in as they rushed through the house. I locked my bedroom door as I was on the line to the police, telling them what was happening and to hurry. The shouts and stomping footsteps proceeded up the stairs as they searched for me. My bedroom door began to shudder with loud bangs. I literally was fearing for my life. I could see my bedroom door was about to burst off its hinges when a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot echoed through the house. The door stopped shaking. My heart was racing when I began to hear raised voices and shouting coming from downstairs. The footsteps outside my bedroom door began to slowly retreat downstairs. I was in a state of shock when I heard a car engine start and a car hightail it down the street. It was then I heard my name shouted out from the welcome sound of my neighbor's voice. I slowly opened my bedroom door to the sight of my neighbor holding his rifle as he asked if I was okay. He had seen the car pull up to my driveway and the men proceeding to break my door down. He knew I was in serious trouble and thankfully was brave enough to come to my rescue. His warning shot was enough to scare the men off, and I will be forever grateful to him that he was so quick, thinking to come to my aid. The police turned up shortly after, and I told them everything, from the Craigslist ad I'd gone to see, to Jason who had placed the ad, and the guy I had seen at this place, and that he was the same one who had broken into my home. Typically, when I looked, the ad was no longer there. When the police checked out Jason's place, there was no Honda, and he denied everything. He was home alone and claimed he didn't know anyone like his accomplice. After hearing the description, I have never been as scared as I was that night. And since that night, I've not used Craigslist to buy anything. It's a great platform, don't get me wrong, but it has many flaws. So please be careful when responding to ads on there, and always take someone with you if you're going to view something, as you never know who you're really dealing with.
I've always been a keen hiker, since I can remember. From childhood, I would go on hiking trips with my father, so that's where my passion for exploring came from. This experience that happened to me is, sadly, why I never go hiking alone anymore. I had recently gone through a breakup and felt I needed to clear my head, and the best way I knew how was to go hiking and be away from the rest of the world for a day. I travelled out of state into a forest that I'd not been to before, somewhere new to explore, and to disconnect and just be with my thoughts for a while. Now, I didn't plan on camping, as I had commitments. I would have to return to the following day, so the trip was just a day trip to a dense forest, doing something that I enjoyed. I set out in the early morning to make the most of the day. When I arrived, I parked up near to the forest as close as I could, but the parking was still a walk away from the forest itself. When I reached it, I began my journey into the depths of the tall trees surrounding me. I had heard there was a beautiful creek located deep in there, and that was my aim, to find the creek and have some time to myself, looking at the beauty of nature. A few hours into my journey, I'd been enjoying my hike, and the quietness of nature of having no one else around it. It was nice to be alone and away from society for a while. I still hadn't come across the creek I was looking for though. As a regular hiker, I did something I'd done many times before, but that people are often told not to do for safety reasons. I broke off from the trail and decided to create my own route through the forest and see if I could stumble upon the creek a different way, being confident with my exploring capabilities. As the day wore on, I had still not come across what I was looking for, so I decided to take a break and rest by the stream I had found, replenishing myself with water and a sandwich that I had packed. Looking at my watch, I was surprised to see that I had already been out there hiking for nearly 5 hours. It was now late afternoon, and I became increasingly concerned by the time and having to make my way back. At that point, I readied my gear and conceded that I didn't have time to find the creek. I would need to think about making my way back instead. Having strayed from the original route and path, I was relying on myself to remember the way back from the route I had taken. As I travelled through the forest, I was slowly beginning to regret my decision of straying from the path. Having done this many times before, I had never had any problems, but now, I found myself lost. All I could see in front of me was the towering trees of the forest, and every direction looked the same. The further I walked in one direction, the more I didn't know if I was heading back the right way or not. I literally felt like I was in a maze. The sky, now beginning to darken, I looked again at my watch, keeping an eye on the time, and again, hours were passing, and I was no closer to getting back, or even finding the entrance where I'd come from. I got out my phone, looking to call a friend to let him know of my situation, when my heart sank. As I looked at my phone, I had no signal whatsoever. Now I was lost in the middle of a forest, the sun was setting, and I had no signal to contact anyone. I continued walking, in the hope that eventually I would just stumble my way out, but my legs were becoming increasingly tired. I had to stop for a rest. I had never got lost hiking before, and I couldn't believe the situation I found myself in. To make matters worse, the temperature had dropped. I was now beginning to feel the cold, and the rain began to fall, typically. I continued walking, as I was now soaked and afraid that I was going to be out there all night. Thinking how stupid I was and angry with myself, I suddenly saw something in the distance. As I got closer, I could see it was a run-down cabin. With it heavily raining, and the realization that I may be out here all night, I thought the best option would be to see if it was accessible and to take shelter. As I approached, I made my way up the steps to the door. As I was about to try the doorknob, I hesitated, firstly knocking on the door. I just didn't know if maybe someone was living out here. As I knocked though, the door was actually unlocked, so slowly pushing it, it creaked open to the sight of a dark, bare room, consisting of only a chair and a broken table. Clearly abandoned, I thought to myself. If I was indeed stuck out here all night, I'd rather be inside under some shelter than in the cold, damp, pouring rain. Making my way inside, I placed my bag down and sat in the chair. My phone still having no signal, it was pointless having it. Looking around, the sound of the rain hitting the cabin made sitting in the darkness of the cabin quite eerie, to be honest. If it wasn't for the rain, it would have been deathly silent. I was tired and exhausted from the stress of being lost and worrying about finding my way back, but I still couldn't rest, so I decided to explore the cabin. Grabbing my bag, I made my way upstairs. Every step I took creaking, as if the stair was going to break. Reaching the top, there was a set of 3 rooms across the landing. I pushed the door open to the closest room. It was again bare, with only a rusted metal bed frame and a broken wardrobe in it. As I stood there in the doorway, what happened next made the hairs on my neck stand, and I will never forget that moment. A shiver ran down my spine, as from behind me, I heard the faint sound of someone crying. Slowly turning my head, My eyes landed on the door at the end of the hallway. The crying was coming from that room. I was frozen to the spot. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who was in that room, and the shock of hearing the crying and knowing I wasn't as alone as I had thought scared the shit out of me. Deciding that I had to see who was in there, and if they were okay, I slowly made my way over to the door. As I hesitantly called out, "Hello." Nearing the door, the crying continued, ringing in my ears. I said hello once more, and as if the situation couldn't get worse, the crying suddenly stopped. Silence fell apart from the rain. It was as if they had heard me. I slowly pushed my hand on the door, afraid to open it. But as it slowly moved, the crying I once heard was replaced with a deep, sinister, male laugh. I pulled my hand back in fear, and as I did, I could hear the booming footsteps of someone running towards the door from the darkness of the room. That was it. Scared shitless, I sprinted back down the stairs and out the front door, hearing the footsteps and laughter behind me. I ran back into the forest, not caring which way I was going, just wanting to get to safety and away from whoever the fuck was in that abandoned cabin. Looking back, no one had followed me out of the cabin. It took me all night to find my way back out of the forest and back onto a trail. When I finally got myself out of there and back to my car, the sun was up. All I wanted to do was get out of there. I have never known fear like it. I don't know who was in that cabin, but someone was in there, and I'm glad I didn't find out who. The crying, the laughter, and running after me, I know their intentions were not good. Since I've never been back to the same place, and when I do hike now, I never hike alone.
I have been working as a self-employed cleaner for over 8 years now, and not once did I imagine anything like this ever happening to me. At one point, I was low on business. It just didn't seem to be happening for me. So, along with your regular advertising, such as business cards, website, and advertisements on my car, I decided to advertise my services on Craigslist and similar platforms. After being informed that this was a good way to get myself a new business, as you could advertise anything on these sites. I had only been advertising for a week when a new customer approached me, messaging me. He was a male in his 40s who was disabled, wheelchair-bound, and lived alone. He included in his message that he was looking for a cleaner once a week to come and clean his house. After a few messages back and forth and a phone chat, he sent me his address and I scheduled to clean his house for the first time Thursday of that week. I was excited that I had only been advertising for a week and had already gotten a new client. On the day I made my way to the man's house, following the GPS to his address, I noticed on the journey that houses got fewer and further between. He seemed to live off-road on a country lane. It was a little out of the way, but when I reached it, I could see it was an old, as what I describe, estate house. I parked up and made my way to the door, ringing the doorbell. The man in a wheelchair answered. He looked very rough and tired in his face. He called me in. As I entered, I could see it was quite dark in there. Most of the curtains were closed. He began to introduce himself and was very specific about what he wanted cleaned. Explaining to me he wanted all the ground floor cleaned, front room, dining room, kitchen, etc. Then upstairs, the bathrooms, his bedroom, but not the back bedroom of the house that would remain locked and didn't need cleaning. That didn't really bother me. I thought that the room may be being used for storage. I agreed and began to work as Joe, my new customer, left me to it. Whilst cleaning his house over the following weeks, I noticed Joe was strange. A lot of the time I would find him watching me clean. I'd turn around and he would just be there staring at me. On a few occasions, he got awfully close. At one point, he brushed past me and grazed my ass. He claimed it was a mistake and apologized, but I wasn't too sure it was. It felt like it was done on purpose. He would then go upstairs in his lift and I wouldn't see him for a while. When I made my way upstairs, I noticed he was in the locked room he told me not to clean. As I neared, I could hear talking and loud giggling coming from inside. It was odd because I knew he lived alone. I assumed he was on the phone talking to a friend or a relative or something. As the weeks went by, it went from him watching me to him beginning to ask me private questions about my personal life, like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live alone? And strange questions like, does anyone know you're working here? Had I told anyone about my new job? He then would again disappear upstairs. These questions bothered me and made me pretty uncomfortable. I thought to myself, no one would ask those kind of questions. We hardly knew each other. With all the questioning and the fact I felt uncomfortable with him watching me on the job, I should have called it quits right there and listened to my gut. But I needed the money and he paid well. So, as you probably guessed it, I decided to continue working there. Feeling uneasy with the whole situation, I did, however, tell my sister about it all. How I felt sorry for the guy being wheelchair bound, but couldn't help but find him strange and quite creepy with how he acted. She didn't live far from me and we were very close. If we weren't sisters, we would be best friends. I gave her the address of the house I was working, and the day before I was next scheduled to go and clean the place, I asked her to check in on me after and give me a call, and joked if she didn't hear from me, that's where I'd be. That day, I was in Joe's kitchen cleaning, when to my annoyance, I noticed Joe acting strange, watching me again intently, like he was waiting for something. Did he not trust me or something? Was he expecting me to rob the place? I remember thinking all these questions. Joe then approached me closer and offered me a drink. He'd never done that before. He'd always just say, "Help yourself to a drink." I declined, saying thank you, but I'd already had some water. This just seemed to agitate him, as he just stared uncomfortably for a second before wandering off. Weirded out by how he just stared at me like he was angry, I continued to clean, just wanting to get the job done and leave. But it was then I heard Joe calling me from another room. He was in his front room. He called me over and asked if I could quickly clean something up, as he had just accidentally spilled something. He spilled a drink all over the floor, so I grabbed a cloth and knelt down to clean it. I looked back to ask him what he had spilled, but again he disappeared. I finished up and went back to the kitchen, having a drink of my water. I heard the lift. Joe was heading upstairs. I thought, great, as I was about to clean up there. I finished up and then headed upstairs. As I reached the top of the stairs, for the first time, the room that was always locked was open and the door was slightly ajar. I remember thinking it was strange, as it was never open. I couldn't see Joe anywhere. Curiosity getting the better of me, I wanted to see what was behind there, why it was always locked. I slowly approached the door. I was beginning to feel all hot. As I slowly pushed the door slightly to peek my head, the door creaked. What I saw behind that door was a monitor screen set up with all the rooms of the house displayed on it. A sickening feeling swept through my body as I saw printouts of me cleaning around the house scattered around it. The creep had been spying on me all this time. But what scared me the most was in the room, all the windows were boarded up, and in the corner there was a huge kennel-like cage. Still feeling hot, I began to suddenly feel lightheaded. My legs felt heavy all of a sudden. I felt fucking awful. Terrified, I turned to head back downstairs to leave. That's when, at the opposite end of the corridor, I saw Joe sitting in his wheelchair, staring straight at me. I tried to muster some words, but I felt so disoriented. Fear crashed through me as I heard Joe say, "Don't worry, you'll be okay soon." I looked at him as the sobering realization kicked in that the bastard had drugged my water. Then the worst thing imaginable to me happened. I saw Joe stand up out of his wheelchair. He wasn't even disabled. He broke out running towards me. This was it. I was dead. This was how I was going to die. All those thoughts ran through my head before I passed out. I woke up confused and disoriented to the sound of people calling my name. I remember thinking, did I dream what happened? But then the terrifying reality hit me. I was still in that house, only to my disbelief, there was police next to me. They told me my sister was outside and she had reported something being wrong with me and having not heard from me at all, fearing something bad had happened. The police had come to check on my location, given to them, and found my car outside. Knowing I was still here, even though Joe had denied it, trying to claim my car had broken down and I had gotten a ride home with someone, due to collect and tow my car the next day. They didn't buy it and searched the house, finding me locked in that room. I am so lucky and will always be so in debt to my sister and her fast thinking. She knew something was wrong when she hadn't heard from me. when she did exactly what I'd asked her to check in on me. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be telling the story right now. The man's real name wasn't even Joe. It was found this guy had set up the profile to lure someone into kidnap. I just so happened to be that unlucky woman. So please be careful who you meet online. It's sad that in this world, things like this aren't uncommon.
I'm a 29-year-old female. I'm a single mother, and I live alone with my 5-year-old son. I've been scared before throughout my life, like we all have at some point, but not until recently have I ever felt the crippling sensation of true fear. And by that, I mean as a mother. My son and I live in a well-sized 3-bedroomed house. The area we live in is a quiet and friendly place to live. There's little to no crime, and it feels like a safe place to bring up a child. I work long hours being a single mom, so I can provide for my son and make sure we get by comfortably. But through doing this, I often have to get a babysitter, which is fine, as it's usually a family member or a close friend. With working these long hours though, as I'm sure you can imagine, I'm often tired and also need to rest myself. A few months ago, after I was finishing up a long shift, it was late, so I went straight from work to pick up my son from my mother's. He'd been there the whole day, and I felt bad sometimes for leaving him so long. I was happy to see him when I picked him up, and with being so tired, I thought it would be a better idea to stop before going home and eat out. So we went to his favorite place to eat. He loved pizza, so that's what we went for. We were seated in a booth situated by the window that faced the street the restaurant was on. As we sat, waiting for our food, I asked him how his day was. It was then he pointed out the window. I looked to the side to see what he was pointing at when he said, "That man over there is pointing over and waving at us." As I looked, an uncomfortable knot built up in my stomach. Across the street, I could see a hooded figure sitting on a bench facing the restaurant. And as I looked closer, I could see, as my son said, the person was pointing straight at us, waving at us through the window. I couldn't make out a face as it was dark outside, and the person had his hood down quite low over his head. The person then stopped waving and just sat there, pointing over at us. I found it quite creepy as they didn't know us and were sitting alone at night in an empty street. I turned to tell my son it was okay not to pay attention to them, but as I did, I noticed my son was waving back over at them. Annoyed at this, I told him to stop at once and that he knew better than to interact with strangers he didn't know. I looked back at the person to see they were now stood straight opposite of us on the other side of the road, standing there motionless as they stared straight in our direction. Feeling uncomfortable and not wanting to sit in the window, I grabbed my son and our stuff and moved tables further inside of the restaurant, notifying the waiters that we'd moved. As I looked round back at the window, to my relief, I could no longer see the person across the street. It wasn't long before our pizza came, and we'd forgotten about the whole thing. We ate up and had some dessert and were soon leaving to head home. As we exited the restaurant, I couldn't help but look around to see if that person was still around. I didn't see anyone, but you know that feeling you get when you feel as if you're being watched? I thought I was overthinking things, and we were soon in the car. I was feeling a lot calmer, and we were on our way home for the night. When we arrived home, it was a late evening. I had to get things sorted for the next day as it was the same routine. Drop my son off to my mother's and head to work before my shift. I bathed my son and got him ready for bed, letting him watch a bit of TV beforehand, while I quickly showered and got myself freshened up, washing the day away. He had a TV in his bedroom, so while he watched TV, I headed for my shower. As I was mid-shower, I think I'd been in there for about 5 minutes by this point, I heard the bathroom door open. I called my son's name, asking if everything was okay, but there was no reply. I peered my head out from behind the shower curtain. To my surprise, it was just an empty room. I could have sworn I heard something, and the door was in fact open. Thinking I must have just left it ajar and the draft had pushed it open, I continued to finish my shower. As I was rinsing the soap away and the shampoo from my head, over the sound of falling water, I began to hear my son's voice. I again called out asking if he was okay, thinking that he was calling me, but again, he didn't reply. As I turned off the water, it was then that I realized he was talking to someone as I heard the words, "She's in the shower still, she'll be out in a minute." I froze for a second. The phone hadn't rang, neither had the doorbell. Confused as to who he was talking to, I called out, asking him who that might be as I quickly put on my robe to go and check. As I left the bathroom and entered the hallway, I could see my son was in my room and not his, sitting on the edge of my bed. I walked over to him and asked him who he was talking to and why he didn't answer me. As I entered my room, he looked up at me, and what he said next made the blood in my veins turn to ice. He said, "The hooded man, he wanted to borrow your phone and asked if I wanted to go and play." As he said this, my heart began to beat out of my chest. I asked him, "What man? And where was my phone?" He pointed over to my bedroom window, which was wide open, followed by the words. He said he had to go now. I raced over to the window and looked outside, scanning the street for anyone, but there was no one in sight. I slammed the window shut looking for my phone, and when I finally saw it on my dresser, I raced over to it, but as I picked it up, I noticed it was already on the camera. Somebody had been using it. I unlocked my phone and opened my gallery, and the color drained from my skin as I felt physically sick. What I saw scared me more than anything I'd ever felt before. There were pictures of me in the shower behind the curtain, but the most haunting of all was there was a picture of my son sitting in my room, but behind him in the reflection of the mirror was a dark hooded figure, waving in the reflection as they took the photo. Someone had been in my house and been with my child. I turned and grabbed my son straight away, hugging him as tight as I could, asking him if he was okay. I never wanted to let him go. I called the police as I tried explaining what had happened as they dispatched an officer. While the officer was on their way, I held my son as I locked all of the windows and doors, feeling sorry as my son really didn't understand the extent of what had just happened. After the police arrived and I explained everything and showed them the pictures, they searched the area but couldn't find anyone. My intruder was never found. I know for a fact it was the same person from outside of that pizza restaurant. It was him in the photo, and I will never forget that image. The fear I felt that night is like no other. My son is my world, and the thought of what could have happened to him is inconceivable. To have that happen in your own home, somebody breaks in, and for me not to realize at the time, I just never imagined that happening to us. I'm always so cautious now and never let my son out of my sight.
So, the use of dating apps has taught me a valuable lesson. A lesson that still makes my skin crawl to this day, and as you may have guessed, this was my first and last time using Tinder. I'd decided to give the whole online dating game a shot. With hundreds of dating apps and dating sites out there, I'd settled on Tinder, one of the most well-known and an app I knew many of my friends had used before. It wasn't long before I started swiping profiles I'd hoped to match with, and earlier than expected, I had matched with a stunning-looking woman called Megan. Her smile captivating in the profile pictures, and a great bio that piqued my interest. She was local to my area, literally a town away around the corner in Hackney. We began talking, and straight from the go, we had so much in common, messaging like we had known each other years and not only days. We made each other laugh and had playful banter and talked about the same interests that we shared. After a few days of talking, it came to a point where we decided to meet for a drink. We settled on a place in the city centre, a half-hour trip, so I decided to take the underground and not drive. I arrived at the bar. It was a place I hadn't been to before. I arrived first, so I found myself a place at the bar and had a study of the menu as I waited for Megan. It wasn't long before she arrived, and I remember thinking, wow, she looked even better in person than she did on her profile. And the relief that it was actually the same person from the profile, as you hear from all of these catfish stories. She greeted me with her captivating smile and a hug as she took a seat next to me, and we ordered some drinks. Firstly, I stuck to the beer as Megan had a more quirky cocktail. We got on like a house on fire and spoke about a wide range of topics, and it seemed that we shared so much in common, from music taste to films we liked. The date was going so well. We had been in there for a while when Megan suggested we take a trip to another bar she knew. I was game and didn't want the night to end. We collected our belongings and made our way to the place Megan suggested. As we walked, I noticed we were straying further out from the main town. The bustling streets became quieter as we continued our way, and I asked Megan how far this place was. She replied with that same smile and that we were almost there, and at the turn of the alley, we were there. The place looked like a hidden club, and it was pretty busy, to be honest. When we got to the door, we had to pay to get in. Megan was rummaging in her bag looking for the cash. I told her no need, and paid for us both to get in. She thanked me, giving me a kiss on the cheek. When we were inside, we again continued the great flirtatious banter we've been having, when Megan chose us a table out of the way of everybody else for some privacy. A few more drinks in, and I was needing the toilet. As I stood up to go to the bathroom, Megan asked me if I was down for trying a cocktail she liked off the menu. I agreed and made my way to the bathroom, thinking how well the date was going. When I arrived back, the drinks were already at the table, and Megan was sitting there, smiling as she waited for me. As I sat down, she brushed her foot up my leg as she sat a bit closer, and she said we should toast with our drinks. As we did, I took a sip, and it tasted great. I asked what it was, and she said it was a tropical cocktail mixed with Malibu that she loved. I too enjoyed the refreshing taste, and as we sat back, the conversation continued. Not 5 minutes later, I was beginning to feel slightly lightheaded. My head began to feel heavy, and my eyes blurred as I tried to shake the feeling off. I remember Megan looking at me, as her smile had faded, and she was looking around cautiously. She began texting on her phone as I sat there, feeling like I was about to pass out. She put her phone down, looked back up at me, and stroked my arm, her voice muffled as she said, "You don't look so good. Are you okay?" As she again looked around cautiously. A ball of anxiety began to build in my stomach as I looked at my empty glass. Not 5 minutes after drinking it, I felt like I'd been hit by a ton of bricks, and the way Megan was acting, I had the haunting feeling my drink was drugged. Feeling I needed to get out of there, I said to Megan that I needed to get some fresh air, and I'd head outside. She agreed, saying that was a good idea. As I wearily got up, the room spinning, Megan guiding me to the exit. The cold air hitting me as I was finally outside. Only this time, there was no one else around. My heart racing, I couldn't even see straight, Megan's face even becoming a blur. As I fell to the floor trying to steady myself, all I could hear was the distorted voice of Megan, and the chilling words,
Don't worry, you will be okay soon.
And then, with that, I knew she had drugged my drink, and the fear of why consumed me. Unable to gain control of myself, everything faded to darkness. I didn't remember anything after that. The next thing I remembered was waking up to a pounding head, my body shivering from the cold, rain-soaked floor I lay on, and a disoriented feeling as I struggled to gain my bearings. I had woken up in the same cold, wet alley I'd stumbled into, only slouched out of view behind a dumpster. The sickening realization hitting me as I discovered my wallet had been taken. My money, cards, all in there, now gone. Not only that, but my watch and jacket stripped from my body. I had been drugged and robbed. The sobering reality of what happened made me physically sick. I called the police to report the crime and what happened to me. From the online date to the night we met, I told them everything. To my shock, they said this was a common occurrence, that dating apps were often used as a tool to lure in unsuspecting victims, and there seemed to be a group operating through these sites, creating fake accounts and meeting men, and repeating this sickening crime that happened to me. They said they would keep me informed on any progress with the investigation. A few people were apprehended involving these robberies, but that Megan, whoever she really was, has sadly yet to be caught, and is probably still repeating this sickening tactic. That was, unsurprisingly, the last time I used any dating apps. The experience has put me off for life, and the feeling I felt that night, the loss of control, the helplessness. I never want to feel like that again. Be careful out there, and I recommend keeping a good eye on your drinks. Hey everyone, The Collector here. We hope you've been enjoying the chilling content so far. Just want to say a massive thank you to the amazing Danie Dreadful for helping out and bringing her amazing voice to the channel, providing a chilling encounter. Go and check out her World of Dread for some amazing content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and become a part of the Horror Motives community. You won't regret it. Comment and let us know you're here and what topics you would like to see soon. And remember, fear lies within.